The sun blazed high over Ember Hollow, turning the dusty ground into a shimmering haze of heat. A restless crowd had gathered at the Granger ranch, their murmurs buzzing like flies in the thick afternoon air. Every eye was locked on the corral, where Shadow Blaze, the wildest horse this side of the Rockies, poured the earth with fury. His black coat gleamed like oil, muscles rippling under the sunlight, and his eyes burned with a fire that promised trouble to anyone foolish enough to step near. For years, that horse had been a legend, a beast no man could tame, a storm on four legs that had sent even the bravest riders sprawling into the dirt. Tessa Granger stood by the fence, her heart thumping hard enough to shake her ribs. At 25, she was no stranger to the wild ways of the West, raised on a ranch that had been her family's pride for 3 generations. Her golden hair spilled from a loose braid, catching the light as the wind tugged at her cotton dress. She was tough as the land itself, with a spark in her blue eyes that said she'd never back down from a challenge. Today was the barn raising, a day of sweat and laughter for the folks of Ember Hollow. But Tessa had turned it into something more with a single, playful dare. "If anyone can tame Shadow Blaze," she'd said, her voice ringing out with a grin, "I'll marry them right here and now." The crowd had laughed, thinking it a fine joke. Shadow Blaze untamable, unbreakable, no one would dare. Tessa herself had only half meant it, tossing the words out like a pebble into a pond, just to see the ripples. But now, as she gripped the fence rail, those ripples were starting to feel like waves. A stir ran through the crowd, heads turning, whispers growing sharp. Someone was moving forward, a stranger, stepping out from the sea of familiar faces. He was tall and lean, his frame carved by the hard life of the open plains. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, but Tessa caught the glint of steady eyes beneath it. His boots crunched the dirt with a slow, sure rhythm, and the way he carried himself calm, almost too calm, made her stomach flip. Who was this man? Walking straight toward the corral like he owned the place. Her father, Elias Granger, stiffened beside her, a broad man with a beard like grey wire. He'd seen his share of drifters and dreamers pass through Ember Hollow. His hand hovered near the pistol on his hip, and his voice came low, gruff. "What's this fool think he's doing?" The stranger didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. He slipped through the corral gate, closing it behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo louder than it should. Shadow Blaze reared up, hooves slashing the air, a scream tearing from his throat that made half the crowd step back. But the stranger stood his ground, hands loose at his sides, watching the horse like he was reading its soul. Tessa's breath caught. This wasn't bravery, this was something else, something deeper. The man began to speak, his voice so soft it barely carried over the wind, but it was steady, warm, like a lullaby woven into the chaos. Words too quiet to catch, yet they worked a kind of magic. Shadow Blaze's ears twitched, his wild thrashing slowing. The crowd fell silent, a hush so thick you could feel it press against your skin, step by careful step. The stranger moved closer. Shadow Blaze snorted, tossing his head. But the fight was draining out of him. Then, in a moment that felt like the world holding its breath, the horse dipped his head, letting the stranger's hand rest on his sweat-slicked mane. A ripple of gasps broke the silence. Amos swore under his breath, and Tessa felt her knees go weak. How had he done it? From the edge of the crowd, Caleb Warwick watched with a scowl twisting his handsome face. A rich landowner with a silver tongue and a temper to match. He'd been circling Tessa for months, his intentions as clear as the gold in his pockets. Now his eyes narrowed, jealousy flaring hot as he stared at the stranger who just turned Tessa's joke into something real. The man led Shadow Blaze out of the corral, the horse following like a loyal dog. The crowd burst into cheers, hats flying into the air, but Tessa barely heard them, her gaze locked with the stranger's as he approached. And for a heartbeat, the world shrank to just the two of them, up close. She saw the lines etched into his face, the quiet strength in his jaw, and a flicker of something in his eyes, secrets, maybe, or promises. Amos stepped forward, planting himself between them. "Who are you, stranger?" he demanded, his voice rough with suspicion. The man tipped his hat just enough to show a faint smile. "Name's Gideon Vale," he said, smooth and simple, like it was all anyone needed to know. But Tessa knew better. There was more to Gideon Vale than a name and a steady hand. Something about him pulled at her, a mystery begging to be unraveled. As the crowd swarmed around him, slapping his back and shouting praise, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a sharp turn down a road she'd never seen coming. And she was right, because Gideon Vale wasn't just a cowboy passing through. He was Elias Stone, a federal agent with a mission burning in his blood. And his arrival in Ember Hollow was about to set off a storm that would test the heart of the West itself. Hey, folks, if that got your pulse racing, smash that like button and hit subscribe. Drop a comment. Tell me, what do you think Gideon's hiding? I'll see you in the next part of this wild ride. Let's keep the adventure rolling together. The sun dipped low, painting the sky over Ember Hollow in streaks of orange and pink. But the buzz from the barn raising lingered like dust in the air. Tessa Granger stood by the corral, her mind still spinning from the stranger's impossible feat with Shadow Blaze. Gideon Vale, those two words echoed in her thoughts, stirring a curiosity that felt like a spark catching kindling. The crowd had scattered, some hauling lumber for the new barn, others swapping stories over whiskey and laughter. But Tessa's eyes kept drifting to the man now leaning against a fence post, his hat tilted low as he spoke quietly with a few ranch hands. There was a stillness to him, a calm that didn't quite fit the chaos of the day. She wiped her hands on her apron, the fabric worn soft from years of work, and started toward him. Her boots crunched the dry earth, each step steady, but her heart anything but. She wasn't sure what she'd say, only that she needed to know more about the man who tamed the untamable, about the look in his eyes that promised stories he wasn't telling before she could reach him. A shadow fell across her path. Tessa. Caleb Warwick's voice cut through the evening air, smooth as honey, but sharp at the edges. He stepped in front of her, his tailored coat and polished boots a stark contrast to the rough-hewn ranchers around them. At 30, Caleb was the kind of man who turned heads, with a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes that held a hunger Tessa didn't trust. He'd been after her hand for months, his proposals wrapped in promises of wealth and security. But they always felt more like chains than gifts. Caleb, she said, her tone polite but cool, stepping to the side. I'm busy. He didn't move, his smile tight, busy chasing after some drifter who got lucky with a horse. His gaze flicked toward Gideon, who seemed oblivious, still chatting with the ranch hands. You don't know a thing about him. Tessa, could be trouble, she bristled, her chin lifting. And you think you know what's best for me? I can handle my own trouble. Thank you. Caleb's eyes darkened, but he stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. Just looking out for you. Your pa's worried too. You know, a man like that doesn't show up out of nowhere for no reason. Tessa didn't answer, brushing past him. His words gnawed at her, though planting a seed of doubt. Caleb was a lot of things arrogant, pushy, but he wasn't always wrong. Who was Gideon Vale, really? And why did her heart skip every time she caught his eye? By the time she reached Gideon, the ranch hands had wandered off, leaving him alone with a tin cup of coffee steaming in his hand. Up close, she noticed the faint scar running along his jaw, half hidden by stubble, and the way his fingers curled around the cup, steady but calloused, like they'd known hard days. He straightened as she approached, his lips curving into that faint smile that made her stomach flutter. Miss Granger, he said, his voice low and warm, like a fire on a cold night. You've got quite the horse there, and you've got quite the way with him, she replied, crossing her arms to hide the nervous energy buzzing through her. No one's ever gotten close to Shadow Blaze without eating dirt. How'd you do it? Gideon's smile deepened, but his eyes held a flicker of something guarded. Just listen to him. Is all. Horses like that, they're not so different from people. They want to be understood. Tessa tilted her head, studying him. That's so. And what about you? Gideon Vale, what do you want? For a moment, he didn't answer, his gaze drifting to the horizon where the last sliver of sun was sinking. When he looked back at her, there was a weight to his words, a place to rest, maybe, a chance to do some good. His answer was simple, but it felt like half a truth. Before she could press further, a shout rang out from the barn site, her father, Amos, calling her over to help with the final beams. She hesitated, wanting to stay, to unravel the puzzle of this man. But duty pulled harder. Don't go disappearing on me, she said, half joking, half serious. I've got questions. I'll be around, Gideon promised, tipping his hat. But as she walked away, she felt his eyes on her, and that seed of doubt Caleb planted grew just a little. The next morning, Ember Hollow woke to a different kind of tension. Word had spread about Gideon's triumph with Shadow Blaze, but so had whispers of trouble. Tessa overheard them at the general store, where folks lingered over sacks of flour and jars of molasses, a bank robbery in a nearby town, a federal agent hunting a dangerous fugitive, a name no one could pin down. The talk made her uneasy, and when she caught sight of Gideon riding into town on a borrowed mare, her curiosity burned hotter. She found him outside the blacksmith's, checking his horse's shoes. Morning, she called, keeping her voice light despite the questions piling up. You settling in or just passing through? He glanced up, his expression unreadable for a moment before softening. Depends on what Ember Hollow's got to offer, he said, a teasing edge to his words that made her cheeks warm. Well, we've got plenty of trouble, if that's what you're after, she shot back, leaning against a post. Folks are talking about some robbery. You heard anything? His hand stilled on the horse's flank. Just for a second. But Tessa caught it. Rumors travel faster than truth out here, he said carefully. I wouldn't put too much stock in them. But Tessa wasn't so sure. That evening, as she helped her father mend a fence, Amos dropped a bombshell. Talk to the sheriff, he said, his voice heavy. That Gideon fella, he's got a shadow on him. Might be tied to something bad. You stay clear. Tessa, her heart sank, but defiance flared too. Gideon didn't feel like a criminal. Not with the way he'd handled Shadow Blaze. Not with the quiet kindness in his eyes. Still, her father's warning echoed Caleb's, and the weight of it pressed against her. She needed answers, and she wasn't the type to wait for them to come to her. As the stars began to speckle the sky, Tessa slipped out of the ranch house, her boots silent on the path to town. She knew Gideon was staying at the boarding house, and she intended to find him. If he was hiding something, she'd get it out of him one way or another. The night air was cool against Tessa Granger's skin as she moved swiftly through the shadows of Ember Hollow, her heart pounding with a mix of defiance and unease. The boarding house loomed ahead, its weathered wooden facade glowing faintly under the moon's pale light. Tessa's boots barely made a sound on the dirt path, her resolve hardening with every step. Gideon Vale's cryptic words from earlier that day, rumors travel faster than truth, had only fueled her need to know who he really was. Her father's warning, laced with the sheriff's suspicions, hung heavy. But Tessa wasn't one to shy away from a mystery, especially not one that made her pulse race like this. The boarding house was quiet, save for the creak of a sign swinging in the breeze. Tessa slipped through the side gate, her eyes scanning the windows. A single light flickered in an upstairs room, Gideon's, she guessed, from the stable hand's gossip. She hesitated, her fingers brushing the worn handle of the knife tucked into her belt. Not that she planned to use it, but out here, a woman alone at night didn't take chances. Taking a deep breath, she climbed the narrow stairs, her steps light but deliberate, until she reached the door marked with a faded number 3. She knocked, soft but firm. Silence answered, stretching long enough to make her doubt herself. Then the door cracked open, and there he was, Gideon Vale, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, hair slightly mussed, as if he'd been running a hand through it. His eyes widened, surprise flashing before they softened into that familiar, guarded warmth. Tessa, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. What are you doing here? I need answers, she said, stepping inside before he could protest. The room was sparse, a narrow bed, a rickety table, a saddlebag in the corner, but it felt alive with secrets. Folks are talking. Gideon, about a robbery, about you. My pa thinks you're trouble, and I'm starting to wonder if he's right. Gideon closed the door, his movements slow, like he was buying time. You shouldn't be here, he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only a quiet urgency. It's not safe, not safe. Tessa's voice rose, sharp with frustration. You tamed Shadow Blaze like it was nothing, and now you're dodging questions like a man with something to hide. Who are you? Gideon. Really, for a moment. He just looked at her, his jaw tight, his eyes searching hers. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories, he stepped closer. "My name's not Gideon Vale," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's Elias Stone. I'm a federal agent, Tessa, working to bring down a man who's been choking this territory for years. Thaddeus Kane." Tessa's breath caught, the name hitting like a thunderclap. Judge, goddamn. That was a twist. Judge Thaddeus Kane, the most powerful man in Ember Hollow. With his iron grip on land deals and town politics, her mind reeled, piecing together the whispers she'd heard at the general store, the sheriff's warnings, the way Gideon Elias moved like a man always watching his back. Kane, she managed, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You're saying he's behind the robbery? More than that," Elias said, his tone grim. "He's got a whole network land grabs, bribes, framing innocent men to cover his tracks. That robbery they're pinning on me, his son's work. I'm here to prove it." But Kane's got eyes everywhere, including Sheriff Royce. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing thick with tension. Tessa's heart hammered as she processed his words. Sheriff Royce, Kane's loyal dog, was no stranger to her, a man with a cold smile and a quick trigger finger. If Elias was telling the truth, she just walked into a hornet's nest. Why tell me now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her gut. "Because you're in this, whether you like it or not," he said, stepping closer, his eyes locked on hers. "Kane's got plans for your family's land. Tessa, Caleb Warwick's in his pocket, and they're not above using you to get what they want." Her blood ran cold. Caleb, of course. His pushy proposals, his veiled threats about the Granger ranch's future, it all made sense now. But before she could respond, a sharp crack split the night, a gunshot. Close, too close. Elias grabbed her arm, yanking her down as another shot shattered the window. Glass raining across the floor, Tessa's heart lurched, adrenaline flooding her veins as she scrambled behind the bed with him. "Royce," Elias hissed, his hand already on the revolver at his hip. "He's found me." Footsteps thundered below, heavy boots on the stairs. Tessa's mind raced, her fingers tightening around her knife. The door burst open, and there stood Sheriff Royce, his badge glinting in the moonlight, a smirk twisting his lips. Behind him, 2 deputies loomed, their rifles raised. Elias Stone. Royce drawled, his voice dripping with menace. "You're a hard man to kill." Tessa's eyes darted to Elias, who met her gaze for a split second, a silent promise passing between them. He moved like lightning, shoving the table toward the door to block the deputy's aim. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the window. Tessa didn't hesitate, her boots slipping on broken glass as they climbed out onto the roof. The night exploded with gunfire, bullets splintering wood as they slid down the slanted shingles and dropped to the ground. They hit the dirt running. Elias leading her toward the stables where Shadow Blaze snorted in his stall. Tessa's lungs burned, her mind a blur of fear and fury. But one thought cut through the chaos she believed him. Elias wasn't the enemy Kane was. And now, with Royce on their heels, they were out of time. The night air whipped past Tessa Granger's face as she and Elias Stone sprinted toward the stables, the echo of gunfire still ringing in her ears. Her boots skidded on the loose dirt, But Elias's grip on her hand was steady, pulling her forward with the urgency that matched the pounding of her heart. Sheriff Royce's shouts and the deputy's heavy footsteps faded behind them. But Tessa knew they weren't out of danger, not by a long shot. The stables loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the starry sky, and Shadow Blaze's restless snorts carried through the open doors like a beacon, calling them to safety. Elias shoved the stable door open, and they slipped inside. The smell of hay and leather wrapping around them, Shadow Blaze tossed his head in his stall, his eyes glinting with that same wild fire Tessa had seen at the barn raising. "Easy, boy," Elias murmured, his voice low and soothing. But Tessa caught the edge of tension in it. He moved fast, grabbing a saddle from the wall while Tessa unlatched the stall gate, her fingers fumbling in the dark. "You sure about this?" she whispered, glancing toward the stable doors. "Royce'll have the whole town after us by dawn." Elias flashed her a grin, quick and reckless, as he tossed the saddle onto Shadow Blaze's back. "Then we better not be here by dawn. You ever ridden a horse this fast?" Tessa raised an eyebrow, her nerves sparking with a mix of fear and defiance. "I was breaking colts while you were probably still learning to shave," he chuckled, a low, warm sound that cut through the tension like a knife. "Fair enough. Miss Granger, let's see if you can keep up." They mounted Shadow Blaze together, Tessa swinging up behind Elias with a practiced ease. The horse snorted, hooves pawing the ground, ready to bolt. But before Elias could spur him forward, a lantern's glow flickered at the stable entrance, and Tessa's stomach dropped. A figure stepped into view, not Royce, thank heavens, but Caleb Warwick, his polished boots absurdly out of place in the dusty stable. His eyes narrowed, taking in the sight of Tessa pressed close to Elias, her arms around his waist. "Well, ain't this cozy?" Caleb drawled, his voice dripping with venom wrapped in charm, sneaking off with the town's newest outlaw. "Tessa, your pa's gonna love hearing about this." Tessa's cheeks burned, the awkwardness of the moment hitting her like a runaway wagon. She tightened her grip on Elias, more out of defiance than necessity. "Go home, Caleb," she snapped. "This ain't your business." "Oh, it's my business when you're throwing away your future on some drifter." Caleb shot back, stepping closer. His gaze flicked to Elias, hard and cold. "You think you can just ride into Ember Hollow and take what's mine?" Elias didn't flinch, his voice steady as steel. "She's not yours, Warwick. Never was." The air crackled with tension, and for a moment, Tessa thought Caleb might draw the pistol at his hip. Instead, he laughed a sharp, bitter sound that didn't reach his eyes. "You're digging your own grave, Vale, or whatever you're calling yourself. Kane's got this town locked down, and you're nothing but a dead man walking." Before Elias could respond, a shout from outside broke the standoff Royce's voice, barking orders to his deputies. Caleb's smirk faltered, and Tessa seized the moment. "Move, Caleb, or Shadow Blaze will run you down," she said, her tone half warning, half tease, though her heart was hammering. Caleb stepped aside, but his eyes burned with a promise of trouble. Elias didn't wait. Spurring Shadow Blaze forward, the horse surged out of the stable, hooves thundering as they tore through the night, leaving Caleb choking on dust. Tessa clung to Elias, her body pressed against his, the heat of the moment mixing with the chill of fear. The awkwardness of Caleb's interruption lingered, but the thrill of their escape burned brighter. They rode hard, the wind stinging Tessa's eyes as Ember Hollow's lights faded behind them. Elias guided Shadow Blaze toward the rocky hills beyond the valley, where the terrain was too rough for Royce's men to follow easily. Tessa's mind raced, piecing together the stakes. Elias was a federal agent, hunted by a corrupt judge and a sheriff who'd sell his soul for $1. And Caleb, damn him, was tangled up in it, his jealousy making him more dangerous than she'd ever realized. They slowed near a cluster of boulders, the horse's sides heaving. Elias slid down first, offering Tessa a hand. She took it, her fingers brushing his calloused palm, and for a moment, their eyes locked, the air between them charged with something unspoken. She pulled away, brushing dirt from her dress, trying to shake off the heat creeping up her neck. "So," she said, forcing a grin to lighten the mood, "you going to tell me where we're running to? Or is this another one of your mysteries?" Elias's lips twitched, a spark of humor in his eyes. "There's a safe spot a few miles out, a cabin used by rangers. We'll hole up there till I can get word to my contact. Nathan Cole, he's a prosecutor, working to bring Kane down." Tessa nodded, but her thoughts snagged on Caleb's words. "You're throwing away your future." She'd never wanted Caleb, not his wealth or his promises, but his accusations stung all the same. What future was she chasing now? Running from the law with a man she barely knew, yet as she watched Elias check Shadow Blaze's reins, his movements sure and steady, she felt a pull she couldn't explain, a trust that defied logic. A rustle in the bushes made them both freeze, hands flying to weapons. Tessa's knife was out in a flash, Elias's revolver gleaming in the moonlight. But instead of Royce's deputies, a scruffy jackrabbit darted out, its ears flapping as it bolted. Tessa let out a shaky laugh, lowering her knife. "Well, that's one way to keep my heart from slowing down." Elias grinned, holstering his gun. "Stick with me, Tessa. Your heart's going to get plenty of exercise." The moment of levity passed, but the drama wasn't over. As they mounted Shadow Blaze again, Tessa caught a glint of light in the distance lanterns, moving fast. Royce wasn't giving up, and Caleb's betrayal had only tightened the noose. Tessa's life had been simple once, just a ranch girl with a wild horse and a stubborn streak. Now, she was riding into a storm, and there was no turning back. The night stretched on, vast and unyielding, as Tessa Granger and Elias Stone rode deeper into the rugged hills beyond Ember Hollow. Shadow Blaze's hooves beat a steady rhythm against the rocky ground, the only sound breaking the eerie quiet that followed their narrow escape from Sheriff Royce's men. The distant flicker of lanterns had faded, but Tessa's nerves still hummed with the thrill of the chase and the weight of Caleb Warwick's bitter words. Her arms were wrapped tightly around Elias's waist, her cheek pressed against the warmth of his back, and each sway of the horse brought them closer in a way that made her heart race for reasons beyond fear. They reached the ranger's cabin just as the moon climbed high, its silver light casting long shadows over the small, weathered structure nestled between pines. Elias dismounted first, his movements fluid despite the tension in his shoulders, and offered Tessa a hand. She slid down, her boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. But his hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through her, stirring something deep and unspoken. She pulled away, brushing a strand of hair from her face, suddenly aware of how close they stood in the cool night air. "Safe for now," Elias said, his voice low, as he led Shadow Blaze to a makeshift hitch post. "But we'll need to move again by first light." Tessa nodded, her eyes scanning the cabin's dark windows. "Safe's a funny word out here," she said, her tone light, but her chest tight. "You sure this place is empty? Rangers haven't used it in months," he replied, pushing the door open with a creak. "Just us and the ghosts tonight." Inside, the cabin was sparse but cozy, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rickety table, and a narrow bed piled with faded quilts. Elias lit a lantern, its soft glow warming the rough wooden walls. Tessa set her knife on the table, her fingers still tingling from the ride, from the feel of Elias's steady presence. She caught him watching her as he shrugged off his coat, the lantern light catching the strong lines of his shoulders, the faint scar along his jaw. Her breath hitched, and she turned away, pretending to inspect the fireplace to hide the flush creeping up her neck. "You cold?" Elias asked, his voice softer now, as he tossed a log into the hearth. "I'll get a fire going. I'm fine," she said, too quickly, then winced at how sharp it sounded. Truth was, she wasn't fine, not with her heart pounding like a drum, not with the memory of his hand in hers. The danger, the secrets, the way he trusted her with his real name, it all swirled together, pulling her toward him like a current she couldn't fight. He struck a match, the flame flaring to life, and soon the fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across the room. Tessa sat on the edge of the bed, her hands twisting in her lap, trying to anchor herself. Elias settled across from her, leaning against the table, his eyes steady but searching. "You're quiet," he said. "Not like you." She let out a small laugh, the sound shaky. "Guess I'm still catching up to all this. Federal agents, corrupt judges, Caleb acting like he owns me, and you." She trailed off, meeting his gaze. "You're not what I expected." He tilted his head, a slow smile tugging at his lips. "What did you expect? Trouble," she admitted, her voice teasing but honest. "But not the kind that makes my heart do foolish things." The air between them thickened, charged with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Elias stepped closer, his boots scuffing the floor, and sat beside her on the bed. The mattress creaked under his weight, and Tessa's pulse quickened at his nearness, the faint scent of leather and pine on him, the way his knee brushed hers. "Tessa," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "This life I'm in, it's dangerous. I shouldn't be pulling you into it." "You didn't pull me," she said, her eyes locked on his. I jumped. She leaned closer, her breath catching as his hand reached up, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered, warm against her skin, and the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them, the crackle of the fire fading to a distant hum. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Elias leaned in, his lips hovering just above hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his voice rough with restraint. "Don't," she whispered. And that was all it took. His lips met hers, soft at first, then deepening with a hunger that matched her own. Her hands found his shoulders, fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss was a spark igniting kindling, warm and urgent, a moment stolen from the chaos closing in around them. His hand slid to her waist, steady and strong, and she melted into him, her heart racing with a thrill that felt like riding shadow blaze at full gallop. They pulled apart, breathless, foreheads resting together. Tessa's cheeks burned, but a grin tugged at her lips. "Well," she said, her voice shaky with laughter, "if that's what running from the law gets me, I might just do it more often." Elias chuckled, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Your trouble? Tessa Granger," says the man with a fake name and a price on his head. She teased, but her smile faded as reality crept back in. The firelight flickered, and outside, the wind carried the faint howl of a coyote. Or was it something else? Royce was still out there. And Caleb's betrayal stung like a fresh wound. Whatever this was between her and Elias, it was fragile, and the storm they were running from was far from over. She stood, smoothing her dress, trying to steady her racing heart. "We need a plan," she said, her voice firm despite the warmth still lingering in her veins. "Kane's not going to stop, and neither's Royce." "What's next?" Elias's expression hardened. The federal agent resurfacing. "We get to Nathan Cole. He's got men ready to move on Kane, but we need evidence, something solid to bury him." Tessa nodded, her resolve stealing. She jumped into this with both feet, and there was no going back, not after that kiss, not after the truth, but as they began to map out their next move. The weight of what lay ahead pressed down, heavy as the night itself. The fire in the ranger's cabin had burned low, its embers casting a faint glow across the wooden floor as Tessa Granger and Elias Stone sat close, their voices hushed but urgent. The memory of their kiss still lingered in Tessa's mind, a warm spark that battled the cold reality of their situation. Elias's plan to reach Nathan Cole, the federal prosecutor, sounded solid enough. Find him, deliver evidence, and bring down Judge Thaddeus Kane's corrupt empire. But the weight of Sheriff Royce's pursuit and Caleb Warwick's betrayal hung over them like a storm cloud ready to burst. Tessa's fingers traced the edge of the table, her resolve firm, but her heart racing with the unknown. Elias spread a tattered map across the table, his finger pointing to a narrow trail winding through the hills. Cole's camped near Redstone Pass. "About a day's ride," he said, his voice steady, but his eyes flicking to the window. "Ever watchful, he's got men, but we'll need to move fast. Kane's got too many eyes in these parts." Tessa nodded, her mind sharp despite the late hour. "And this evidence you keep talking about, what is it? You can't just ride into a prosecutor's camp with nothing but a good story?" Elias hesitated, his jaw tightening. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal, its pages worn and stained. "This," he said, setting it on the table. "Names, dates, deals, Kane's dirty work. Written by a man who used to run his books." He turned it over to me before Kane's men got to him. Tessa's eyes widened as she flipped open the journal, scanning the cramped handwriting. Land deals, bribes, even a murder pinned on an innocent settler. It was all there, a web of corruption that made her stomach churn. "This could ruin him," she whispered, then looked up, her voice hardening. "Why didn't you take it straight to Cole?" "Because Kane framed me for that bank robbery," Elias said, his tone bitter. The moment I show my face, I'm a wanted man. That's why I need you. Tessa, you're my way in someone Cole will trust. Her heart skipped, not just from the weight of his words, but from the way he looked at her, like she was more than a ranch girl, like she was his partner in this fight. She opened her mouth to respond, but a sharp crack outside snapped her head toward the window. Elias was on his feet in an instant, revolver drawn, his body shielding hers. The cabin fell silent. The only sound, the faint whistle of wind through the pines, or was it something else? Stay low, Elias whispered, creeping toward the door. Tessa grabbed her knife, her pulse hammering as she crouched beside the table. The crack came again, closer now, followed by the unmistakable crunch of boots on gravel. Her mind raced Royce Caleb Kane's men. But before she could brace for a fight, the door swung open and a figure stepped into the lantern's glow. And it wasn't Royce, it wasn't Caleb, it was Amos Granger, Tessa's father, his weathered face pale with fury and fear. A rifle rested in his hands, and behind him stood two ranch hands, their eyes wide with confusion. Tessa's breath caught, shock rooting her to the spot. Pa, she managed, her voice trembling. What are you doing here? Amos's gaze locked on Elias, his rifle steady. Step away from my daughter. Stone, he growled. I heard everything, federal agent or not. You're dragging Tessa into a mess that'll get her killed. Tessa's heart sank, the twist hitting her like a punch. Her father here? Now, after tracking them through the night, she stepped forward, hands raised, her voice sharp with desperation. Pa, listen to me. Elias isn't the enemy. Kane's the one you should be aiming at. But Amos's eyes burned with distrust, fixed on Elias. I followed you from town. Tessa heard the gunfire, saw you run off with him. Then I find you holed up in this shack, whispering about journals and prosecutors. You're in over your head. Girl, and this man's using you. Elias lowered his revolver slowly, his voice calm but firm. I'm not using her. Amos, she's in this because she chose to be, because she's brave enough to stand up to Kane. The words hung heavy, but Amos wasn't swayed, brave or foolish. She's my daughter, and I'm taking her home. You come near her again, Stone, and I'll put you in the ground myself. Tessa's blood boiled, torn between loyalty to her father and the fire Elias had sparked in her. She stepped between them, her voice rising. Enough. Pa, I'm not a child. You can drag back to the ranch. Kane's coming for our land, for our home. Elias is fighting to stop him. And I'm fighting too. The ranch hands shifted uncomfortably, their loyalty to Amos clear, but their unease growing. Amos's face softened for a moment, pain flickering in his eyes, but then it hardened again. You think you're saving the ranch? You're throwing it away. Tessa, Caleb Warwick came to me tonight, told me everything, how Kane's got plans to seize our land if we don't play his game. The mention of Caleb was a knife to Tessa's gut, but the real twist came next. Amos reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, tossing it onto the table. Found this in your room. Tessa, a letter from Caleb, begging you to marry him, promising to protect the ranch if you do. You kept that from me. Tessa's breath hitched, her mind reeling. The letter, she'd shoved it under her pillow weeks ago, dismissing it as another of Caleb's manipulative ploys. But now, in her father's hands, it was a weapon, proof she'd hidden something from him. The room spun, the weight of the moment crashing down. Her father thought she was betraying the family. And Elias, God. What must he think? She glanced at him, but his face was unreadable, his eyes fixed on the letter. "Pa, I didn't," she started, but Amos cut her off. "No more lies," he said, his voice breaking. "You're coming home, Tessa, now!" The cabin was a powder keg, ready to explode. Elias's hand twitched toward his revolver, but Tessa caught his eye. Shaking her head, she needed to fix this. But how her father's mistrust, Caleb's schemes, Kane's shadow, it was all closing in, and the journal on the table was their only hope. But as Amos stepped forward, rifle still raised, Tessa realized the real fight wasn't just against Kane, it was to keep her family and her heart from tearing apart. The air in the ranger's cabin was thick with tension, the flickering lantern casting long shadows that danced like spectres on the walls. Tessa Granger stood between her father, Amos, and Elias Stone. Her heart caught in a vice as Amos's rifle gleamed in the dim light, his eyes burning with a mix of betrayal and fear. The letter from Caleb Warwick lay on the table like a guilty verdict, its creased edges a silent accusation that Tessa had kept secrets from her family. Elias's gaze flicked between her and Amos, his hand hovering near his revolver, but the weight of Tessa's pleading look kept him still. The standoff felt like a fuse burning down to its last inch, and Tessa knew she had to act before it blew. "Pa, please," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "That letter from Caleb, it's nothing. He's been hounding me for months, and I never gave him an answer. You know I'd never betrayed the ranch." Amos's jaw tightened, his grip on the rifle unwavering. "You kept it from me, Tessa, hid it like you were ashamed. And now you're out here with this man." He jerked his head toward Elias, a wanted man, spinning tales about judges and conspiracies. "How am I supposed to trust you?" The words cut deep, and Tessa's chest ached with the sting of her father's doubt. She stepped closer, her hands outstretched, her voice softening. "I'm fighting for our home. Pa, Kane's the one coming for our land, not Elias. He's got proof. Right there." She pointed to the journal on the table, its worn leather cover holding the key to unraveling Thaddeus Kane's empire. Amos's eyes flicked to the journal, hesitation creeping into his weathered face. But before he could respond, one of the ranch hands, a wiry young man named Tommy, cleared his throat, shifting awkwardly on his feet. Mr. Granger," he stammered, his face red as a beet. "There's something you ought to know. I saw Caleb riding toward town before we left. Looked like he was heading to the sheriff's office." Tessa's blood ran cold, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Caleb, that snake, wasn't just stirring trouble with her father. He was running straight to Sheriff Royce, probably spinning lies to tighten the noose around Elias. The room seemed to tilt, the drama spiking as the stakes climbed higher. "He's working with Kane," she said, her voice sharp with realization. "Caleb's selling us out. Pa, you've got to believe me." Amos's rifle lowered an inch, his eyes searching hers, but the moment was shattered by a distant shout too close, too urgent. Elias spun toward the window, his revolver now in hand. "They're coming," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Royce's men, maybe Caleb too. We're out of time." The cabin erupted into chaos. Tommy and the other ranch hand, a burly man named Jed, scrambled to bar the door, their boots scuffing the floor in a clumsy dance that might have been funny if Tessa's heart wasn't pounding like a war drum. "Pa, we've got to move," she said, grabbing the journal and shoving it into her satchel. "You can hate me later, but right now, we're all in this together." Amos hesitated, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. But the sound of hooves thundering closer snapped him into action. "Damn it, Tessa," he muttered, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "You're going to be the death of me." Elias flashed a wry grin. Despite the tension, she's got that effect. So now let's get to Shadow Blaze before Royce turns this cabin into kindling. They spilled out into the night, the cool air hitting Tessa like a slap as they raced toward the hitch post where Shadow Blaze snorted. Sensing the danger, Elias vaulted onto the horse, pulling Tessa up behind him, while Amos and the ranch hands scrambled for their own mounts. The awkwardness of the moment, her father glaring at Elias, Tommy tripping over a root in his haste, almost made Tessa laugh. But the sight of lanterns bobbing in the distance killed any humour. Royce's men were closing in, their shouts carrying on the wind like wolves on the hunt. They spurred their horses into a gallop, the ground blurring beneath them as they tore through the pines. Tessa clung to Elias, her arms tight around his waist, the journal pressed against her side like a lifeline. But as they rounded a bend, a figure loomed ahead, blocking the trail. Caleb Warwick, astride his sleek black stallion, his face twisted with a smugness that made Tessa's blood boil. Behind him, two of Royce's deputies raised their rifles, their badges glinting in the moonlight, going somewhere. Tessa, Caleb called, his voice dripping with mockery. "You and your outlaw can't run forever." Amos reined in his horse, his rifle snapping up. But Tessa saw the trap more men were circling, their shadows moving through the trees. "Caleb, you coward," she shouted, her voice cutting through the night, selling out to Kane. "You think that'll win you anything but a noose?" Caleb's smile faltered, but he leaned forward, his tone venomous. "You had your chance. Tessa, now you'll see what happens when you pick the wrong side." Elias's hand tightened on the reins, his voice low enough for only Tessa to hear. "Hold on tight. This is about to get messy." Before she could respond, Elias spurred Shadow Blaze forward, straight at Caleb. The sudden move caught the deputies off guard, their shots going wide as the horse barreled through. Caleb's horse reared, and in the chaos, Tessa caught sight of Amos firing a warning shot, scattering the deputies. Tommy, bless his clumsy heart, nearly fell off his horse but managed to swing a rope that tangled one deputy's legs, sending him sprawling with a yelp that was almost comical. They broke through the line, the trail opening up ahead, but Tessa's heart sank as she glanced back. Caleb was already remounting, his face a mask of fury, and more lanterns flickered in the distance. The drama was far from over, and the awkward tangle of her father's mistrust, Caleb's betrayal, and the growing bond with Elias was pulling tighter. She pressed closer to Elias, her voice fierce. "We're not done yet. Are we not?" "By a long shot," he said, his tone carrying a promise that sent a thrill through her, despite the danger. The journal in her satchel was their weapon, but the fight to use it was only just beginning. The wind howled through the pines as Tessa Granger clung to Elias Stone, Shadow Blaze's hooves pounding the trail beneath them. a desperate rhythm that matched the pulse thundering in her chest. The journal, heavy with Thaddeus Kane's secrets, pressed against her side. A fragile hope amidst the chaos of their escape. Behind them, Caleb Warwick's furious shouts faded, drowned by the thunder of Amos Granger and his ranch hands riding hard to cover their flank. The lanterns of Sheriff Royce's deputies flickered like fireflies in the distance, but Tessa's focus was forward toward Redstone Pass, toward Nathan Cole, toward the chance to end Kane's reign over Ember Hollow. They rode through the night, the trail twisting through rocky outcrops until the first grey light of dawn crept over the hills. Elias reined in shadow blaze near a shallow creek, the horse snorting as he dipped his head to drink. Amos and the ranch hands caught up, their faces grim but resolute. Tessa slid down, her legs shaky from the ride, and met her father's gaze. The anger in his eyes had softened, replaced by a weary pride that made her throat tighten. "You're stubborn as a mule, Tessa," he said, his voice gruff but warm. "But you're a Granger. Let's finish this." Elias handed the journal to Tessa, his fingers brushing hers, a quiet reassurance in his touch. "Cole's camp is just over that ridge," he said, pointing to a rise where smoke curled faintly against the sky. "We get this to him, and Kane's done." But the plan wasn't simple. As they crested the ridge, Tessa's heart sank. Cole's camp was there, tents, horses, a handful of federal men. But so was Royce. His deputies fanned out, rifles ready. Caleb stood beside him, his face smug. And at the center was Thaddeus Kane himself, his tailored coat pristine, despite the dust of the trail. The sight was a punch to the gut. How had they known Elias cursed under his breath, his hand on his revolver? "They must have cut through the canyon," he said. Kane's playing his last card. Tessa's mind raced. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. But the journal burned in her hands, and the fire in her heart burned hotter. "I've got an idea," she whispered, her voice steady despite the odds. "But it's risky." Amos raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "When's that ever stopped you?" She outlined her plan. Quick and bold, she'd ride into the camp alone, pretending to surrender, using the journal as bait to get close to Kane. Elias would signal Cole's men for a coordinated strike, while Amos and the ranch hands created a distraction. It was a gamble, but Tessa's resolve was ironclad. Elias hesitated, his eyes searching hers, but he nodded. "Be careful," he said, his voice low, carrying the weight of everything unspoken between them. Tessa tucked a small derringer into her boot, a gift from her mother years ago, and rode toward the camp. Her hands raised in mock surrender, the deputies parted, their rifles trained on her. As Kane stepped forward, his smile cold as winter. "Miss Granger," he said, his voice smooth as venom. "Come to beg for your outlaw's life. I'll give you the journal," she said, holding it up, her voice steady. "But you let Elias go." Kane's eyes gleamed with greed, but Caleb stepped forward, his face twisted with jealousy. "She's lying, Judge. She's in love with him. Can't you see it?" The words stung, but Tessa used them, letting her voice tremble as she spun her tale. "Caleb's right. I thought I loved him, but I want my family safe. Take the journal. Let us walk away." She edged closer, her heart pounding as Kane reached for the book. His fingers brushed the leather, and she saw his guard drop, his arrogance blinding him. That's when she acted. Tessa dropped the journal, drawing the derringer in a flash and pressing it to Kane's chest. "Move, and you're done," she hissed, her voice fierce. At the same moment, Elias's signal, a sharp whistle, cut through the air. Cole's men sprang from their tents, guns drawn, as Amos and the ranch hands charged from the ridge, whooping and firing into the air. Royce's deputies faltered, caught off guard, and Caleb froze. His bravado crumbling, the camp erupted into chaos gunfire. Shouts, the thunder of hooves. Tessa held Kane firm, her derringer steady, until Elias and Cole's men closed in, disarming the deputies. Royce tried to run, but Amos tackled him, pinning him to the dirt with a grin that said he'd been waiting for this. Kane's empire crumbled in minutes, his men surrendering as Cole's team secured the camp. When the dust settled, Kane and Royce were bound, the journal safely in Cole's hands. Tessa's legs shook as she lowered her gun, the weight of the moment crashing down. Elias was at her side in an instant, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes full of relief and something deeper. "You're one hell of a woman!" "Tessa Granger," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She grinned, exhaustion and triumph mixing in her chest. "Took you long enough to notice. 6 months later, Ember Hollow was a different place. Kane's network was dismantled. 12 officials convicted thanks to the journal and Tessa's courage. The Granger Ranch thrived. Renamed Granger Stone in honor of the new life Tessa and Elias were building. They'd married in a quiet ceremony under the valley's oaks. Shadow Blaze grazing nearby, his spirit as untamed as ever. Tessa's hand rested on her growing belly, a new legacy taking root, while Elias, no longer a federal agent, worked the land beside her, his heart finally home. They stood by the corral one evening, watching Shadow Blaze lead a herd of his foals, their coats gleaming in the sunset. "Think they'll be as wild as their pie?" Tessa asked, leaning into Elias's side. He wrapped an arm around her, his smile warm as the fading light. "With you as their mother, they'll be unstoppable." The valley stretched before them, alive with promise, a testament to love forged in fire, trust earned through battle, and a spirit that no storm could break. Hey, folks, what a ride. Did Tessa and Elias's love story steal your heart? Drop your favorite moment in the comments. Smash that like button and subscribe for more Wild West adventures. Thanks for joining us in Ember Hollow. Until next time.